Welcome to the Sage Intacct Planning Overview. Today we'll be walking through an overview of Sage Intacct Planning as well as a demo on how you can connect your Sage Intacct Planning with your Sage Intacct core financials to be able to create a budget from scratch within minutes and also highlight some of the key functionalities available to you immediately after your initial budget is set up within Sage Intacct Planning. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we get to the demo, I just want to introduce Sage Intacct Planning and give you a quick overview of what it is. So Sage Intacct Planning is a cloud-based planning solution that eliminates reliance on uncontrolled, inflexible, unsecure spreadsheets and replaces them with a real-time, single source of truth for agile and confident decision making. So we really see a lot of our customers being able to streamline their annual planning process and complement that with our monthly forecasting process, be able to have access to what-if scenario planning at their fingertips, be able to create driver-based plans with details like employee planning, and of course have access to the reporting and analysis, all while being connected to Sage Intacct core financials. So as you can see, our core features revolve around being able to save a lot of time and also be agile. We want to move fast and make changes as your company grows. We want to provide you that place so you can trust the numbers when you go look at your budget and your forecast. You know those inputs from the business users can be trusted due to the collaborative nature within the application and having real-time access to their inputs. And of course, being able to see that full financial picture, not just the annual budget, but being able to see what those forecast numbers are, be able to look at your key business drivers and perform a what-if scenario on the fly and see the results to be able to make more informed decisions. So let's go ahead and take a look at Sage Intacct. Okay, I've already logged into Sage Intacct Planning, and we're going to go through the process of creating a brand new budget from scratch using my Sage Intacct data. So right on day one, as you gain access to the Sage Intacct Planning application, you can immediately go in and build a budget from scratch by using your Sage Intacct data. Now to do that, we'll be able to walk through a 10-step process after signing into your Sage Intacct environment. So this is your existing environment that you already have set up today. So by signing in, that allows Sage Intacct Planning to be able to access your different dimensions, your structure, your data, so you can build a budget utilizing that already existing data. So as we walk through this wizard, we're able to choose if we want to create a budget from all of our entities or just a single entity. We would set up our budget settings to be able to name our budget. So this is called specialty products. We also can choose our budget type, either company or nonprofit. And we also can populate the date range for our budget. So we're looking at a one-year budget for 2023. But of course, you can have a multi-year budget if that's how your organization likes to plan their future financials. In the next step, this will be a list of all the different dimensions you have within your core financial Sage Intacct environment. So in this case, in our example, we have department, which we do budget by. We have location. So since we have chosen the multi-entity choice in step number one, it's going to go ahead and select location for us. And we also budget our revenue by customer. But vendor and item are too low of a level, so we're going to hold off on those. But you have the ability to pick and choose at what level and what dimensions that you want to be able to budget by. So by selecting our dimensions and the members within them, we can go on to the next step. If you have employee records in your core Sage Intacct and you want to be able to bring them into Sage Intacct Planning, you absolutely can do that through this step. If you do not have them in Sage Intacct, you can load in your employees after the fact once you get your budget structure up and running. And that's all through our Excel import process, which is a really easy way of importing Excel information for your named employees. So we'll go ahead and select yes, because we do have employee records in there. Next on the list is really looking at what level you want to be able to budget at. And what I mean by that is if you budget at a higher level from an account standpoint than what you actually capture within your Sage Intacct core financials, you can go ahead and merge them into a single budget line. So this is not required, but just in case you want to be able to say, office supplies, phone and internet, dues and subscriptions, we want to go ahead and consolidate those together into a single budget line. So we'll go ahead and choose the new budget line name as office supplies. And now you can see that these three accounts will all merge into a single budget line. And this mapping will apply when you load actuals in after the fact on that monthly basis. That mapping is already created. So nice and easy when it comes to choosing what level you want to budget at. Now the next step is really determining your budget structure. So remember the dimensions that we brought in from Sage Intacct in an earlier step? They're available here on the left-hand side. So you have departments, locations, customers. And on the right-hand side here is our budget structure. So we have our main account groups, revenues, cost of revenue, operating expenses, and other. Now we get to drag and drop our dimensions to create that budget structure that makes the most sense for us. So for example, our revenues, as I mentioned before, we like to plan by customer. And same thing goes for our cost of revenue as well. But that doesn't really apply to how we plan our operating expenses. That is really planned by department. So you can see as I drag and drop this information into those major account groups, this will go ahead and build our budget structure in that view that we wish. And we'd like to see all these major account groups by location. So we want to be able to split that out at the highest level. So we're able to choose location. So we have our budget by location with our revenues, cost of revenues, operating expenses in this particular structure. So we'll go ahead and click next. Now, a lot of times our customers like to seed their next year's budget with a set of data. In this step, we give you the option to populate your base budget with actuals and or budgets with Sage Intacct. So in this case, we'll go ahead and select yes, because we want to use last year's historical data plus any of the months that we haven't arrived to from an actual standpoint. We want to populate the rest of that with our budget version. So for example, we'll go ahead and use 2021 as an example. And you can see, let's take the example that we're in November. We don't have November and December actuals in yet. So we want to go ahead and populate those remainder of the months using a budget version. So let's say we have forecast already in Sage Intacct. We'll go ahead and populate that here. Now you also can set year over year changes, like an increase or decrease at that mass level. So for example, if we have a directive to decrease all our operating expenses by 5% for next year's budget, you can make mass adjustments here. If you don't make those mass adjustments, no problem, just keep everything as 0 and we can adjust those items later. Now this is going to go ahead and bring all the information together in and how we actually walk through our budget wizard. So it will determine our budget structure, it will load the data, and when it's finished, which will take about 90 seconds or so in this case, we'll have a fully populated budget with the account structure, data, ready to go, ready to start being modified by those users. So I'll take a quick break and I'll show you exactly what that looks like right after this wizard is finished. Now that the wizard has completed, it will bring us to our brand new application that we just created from scratch. Think about that. That took us about 7 minutes to be able to create a whole budget utilizing your custom budget structure, the data that you have from Sage Intacct, as well as leveraging those dimensions that you have in Sage Intacct as well. So to introduce you to what we just created from a budget structure standpoint, you can see as we determined in our wizard, we have our different locations that we wanted to group our budget by. If we expand one level, you can see for each of those locations, I have access to our major account groupings. And if I drill a little bit further, you can see we have our revenues by different account. We also have our operating expenses by our different departments, which then drills down into the actual account level. So this is the budget that we created utilizing that budget wizard. And you can see as I'm clicking through these different levels, we can see our preview of that budget, that base set of data that we populated through the wizard. So automatically we have a full set of information based upon those settings we set in the wizard. Now, right off the bat, first thing, we can go right over to Sheets and be able to take a look at all our pre-built reports that are already populated based upon that data that we selected within the wizard. So you can see immediately we have access to our working budget. That's our base budget. We also have access to our different dimensions that we loaded through the wizard: department, location, category, and so forth. And as we expand into our revenues or other major account groups, you can see here's those locations that we wanted to group this information by. So you have the ability to drill down into a low level of detail to be able to take a look at what our budget numbers are that we seeded from that budget wizard. We also have some reporting capabilities that, let's say we wanted to take a look at our operating expenses by location. Looks good there. But if we wanted to quickly toggle and kind of slice and dice this data to create the view that we wish, we can easily come in here and choose, I want to see all my operating expenses across all my different locations by department. So now you can see we have information in operations, we have a manufacturing, R&D. We can look at what location is that sitting in our central region. So we have access to different views of our data based upon the dimensions that we've brought in from Sage Intacct. Now, of course, as we progress through the year and we want to be able to load in actuals from Sage Intacct, we will have an automatically created view within Sheets to look at our budget versus actuals. So we can see immediately in January and February that we have actuals through, what the difference is by month for any of the levels that we have created in our budget tree. So once again, we have the ability to come in here. How does our revenues look by location? We can see, our central region here is lagging a bit behind from a revenue standpoint. We can drill down deeper to see, is it standard products versus premium products and so forth. So lots of visibility into having actuals and our budget side by side. Now you may be wondering, how did we get these actuals into the system? Now, once again, with that fantastic integration with Sage Intacct, we have the ability to connect back to Sage Intacct, log in, and this is where you can go ahead and sync any of those actuals you have from Sage Intacct into Sage Intacct Planning. So it walks you through a quick process to be able to determine what type of information you want to bring in to planning from Sage Intacct. And then also it will walk you through exactly what set of data do you want to bring into Sage Intacct Planning, what reporting book you want to bring this in from, as well as what date range. So this will go ahead and include all that information that you choose in this wizard and load in actuals into Sage Intacct Planning. So you have immediate visibility into actuals versus budget. Now to take it one step further, we have another automated set of data called rolling. And what rolling is, it's really year-to-date actuals, plus the remainder is your working budget. So as I change that view, you now can see here's your actuals year-to-date and the remainder of your budget going forward. So you have a full year view of what your latest and greatest set of data and projections are for your organization. Now to take it one step further, as I mentioned in the opening, we have the ability to bring in forecasts as well. So as you're moving throughout the year, you're able to take snapshots of your forecasts. Let's say it's a January forecast or a February forecast and so forth. So when you do create those snapshots, you'll be able to easily change and view your January forecast For example, what those updated financials look like as you're progressing throughout the year. And of course, you always have that visibility to be able to filter and focus in on your different dimensions in whatever scenario and version that you're in. So whether you're in your base budget, your actuals versus forecast, or your forecasts, you can always drill in and be able to focus in on a specific dimension member. So very flexible from that standpoint. And to take it one step further, Sheets is our pre-built traditional type reporting structure, but we also have dashboards that reflect a visualization of the information we have in Sage Intacct Planning. So once again, you always have access to your budgets, your forecasts, any scenarios that you built in, and so forth, as well as the filtering capability on your dimensions in visualizations that you choose. So you can create multiple dashboards, you can add widgets, which is these visualizations we see here. We have access to look at headcount, for example. Do we want to look at that by department? Do we want to look at that actuals versus budget, and so forth? So interactive, real-time sets of visualization. Now that we've created a full budget from scratch, utilizing that wizard that took us about 7 minutes to do, we have highlights of the pre-built dashboards and pre-built reports that are automatically ready for you upon budget creation to be able to slice and dice the data. Now let's take a look at how you would modify that data. So in our inputs area, when we first logged in, remember we looked at the budget structure we have over here on the left-hand side. Let's say we're ready to go ahead and make changes to that initial set of budget data that we loaded into the tool. Now, because we are an organization that we want to have our business users be able to contribute and enter their own set of data, just to build on that collaboration feature, we do have the ability to share a portion of the budget or the whole budget with team members. So in this example, since we are on our SPC Central location, as we share this portion of the budget, our team member, which we'd enter their email address, decide if they can view or modify the set of data, they would be notified by an email to be able to log in, either view that set of data, which of course can be restricted to whatever situation that makes sense for that team member, whether you don't want them to see headcount or specific reports and so forth. Or if they can modify, they would be able to log in, see only the central region, only what you gave them security access for, and now make modifications to that budget. So they're going to have a better sense of accountability and ownership of their portion of the data and the budget. Now let's take a look quickly on how we can build a driver-based budget using our capabilities around models. So in this example, we're taking a look at our revenues for our central region. We're looking at our standard products revenue line. Now you can see right here in our monthly view, this is the preview of our P&L, our budget numbers. Now, let's say we wanted to see how does this match up versus last year? We can easily change the view to be able to see our budget versus past data. Or if you wanted to see what actuals rolled in for those first 2 months, you can easily change that view. You can see those 2 months of actuals. You can see how does this trend versus our last year's set of data versus what we have in the budget this year. So you can see last year we had about $1.4 million worth of standard products revenue. This year we're budgeting for $1.9 million. So we really want to understand, where did this $1.9 million come from? We don't want just a basic number in here for each month for revenue. We really want to use drivers to be able to calculate this information in our budget for our revenues. Now, the fantastic part about models is this allows you to create models and drive this number in a really easy to use, really intuitive way to build up additional detail around these numbers. Now, we've already pointed to a specific model line to pull in these revenue numbers. So let's go to our models and see where is that number coming from and what key business drivers did we use in order to generate that particular number. So if we go over to our models, we can see that we have a model built for our standard products. Over here on the right-hand side, how we're generating that particular dollar amount, that revenue dollar amount, is using some fixed assumptions around the items that we sell. So we have an item 101 and an item 102, and we have a list price associated to those items. So we want to capture that as a fixed assumption. And then down here at the bottom, we're capturing non-financial data, like the number of units we're expecting to sell throughout the year, and then creating a calculation to be able to take units times our list price and generate by item the sales revenue that we have for the next year. And we're doing that exact same thing for our other item 102, and we're totaling these up to be able to generate that $140,000 in January and so forth going forward. We're doing that exact same thing from a premium product standpoint, being able to capture this data, from our sales team, getting their forecasts in here on a regular basis, so we have access to the latest and greatest projections. Now, all these numbers are feeding into that budget line items over here in our budget structure. So as we're updating assumptions, as we're updating numbers of units expected to sell, our budget will automatically be updated. And anything that is being driven off of that revenue number will automatically update in our cost of revenues or operating expenses like commissions, for example. Because we have the ability for a driver-based forecast, it's really easy to be able to make an adjustment and see that flow through the entire financial statements. Now let's take an example one step further from our models. Let's say we are progressing through the year and our executive suite has decided that they want to be able to make changes to our list price. Now, before actually making that change, we want to test out and create a what-if scenario to be able to see what would happen if we increased our list price by a certain percentage, for example. So we can do that by the use of scenarios. So by creating a brand new scenario from scratch, this will create a copy of our whole set of data. So we can call this change in list price. When we create this, we'll have a separate set of data in our what if scenario, you can see highlighted in blue, that we now can make changes to but not affect our working budget. So now we can come back into our models and make adjustments to our list price. So we'll go ahead and increase this, let's say to $1,600 and this to $2,300. And as I'm making those changes, it's recalculating down here at the bottom and calculating our brand new set of revenue dollars and pushing that back to our main budget structure. Now, as I click over to our standard products, you can see that those changes I just made in premium products are highlighted in blue. So you can easily identify where you make those changes within your what if scenario. So it's easy to see exactly where those changes were made if you want to go back and make additional adjustments. Let's go ahead and make another change here to our standard products, and we'll go ahead and submit those, save them. Our model has recalculated, and now we can automatically go right over to our sheets area, those pre-built reports, be able to filter on that scenario that we just created and see a full set of financials with those updated key business drivers. So now our revenues are updated. Anything that's based on those revenues from a cost of revenues or operating expenses standpoint, that will automatically be updated. And we have a comparison with our working budget ready to go right off the bat. So now we can see by changing those list price dollars, we have affected our revenues, our cost of revenues, as well as our operating expenses. And we can see the net impact of those changes to the list price for the entire year. That will increase our profit by about $410,000. So now we have all that information that we need to go back to the executive team to say, if we do make those changes within our budget, we will have an increased profit of $410,000 for the year. Now, you may be thinking, great, what do we do with this what if scenario now that we've had that conversation with the executive team? We do have an option to say, maybe they didn't want to go forward to make those changes. We can go ahead and just delete that. Or if you want to go ahead and apply those changes and merge with the budget, you can do that within one click of a button. So it's fantastic because you don't have to go back through and make all those changes again. You can see that we now have merged all those changes we made in the what if scenario, now applied to our budget. So if we go back to our models, you can see our list price have been adjusted. You can see that happening in our premium products as well. And now we have affected our entire financial statement for our budget with those changes that we made. Now we've covered revenues from a modeling standpoint. To cover briefly some operating expenses as well, we have some really neat functionality to be able to make mass changes to populate with past data. So for example, our marketing group, let's say we've already populated the information in our budget with some past data, but we want to actually just go ahead and include the entire marketing department. We want to be able to populate the budget. Instead of going line by line by line, we can highlight that group and be able to populate that entire marketing department with last year's set of data plus, let's say, 10%. And you can round to, let's say, the nearest hundreds. So you don't have to go ahead and go through every line by line to do that. We can go ahead and adjust that automatically and populate that entire group with that set of data plus 10%. So there you can see we now have increased our entire marketing budget for all of the different items that are rolling up to the marketing group. We have adjusted that set of data. So very easy to do. And as you can see from, let's say, a lodging expense standpoint, if we just go into a single account so you can see what it looks like from a detailed level, we have the ability to look at what our budget is for next year. And we also have the ability to make changes to that as well. So let's say our lodging expense only really happens on a quarterly basis, and we want to be able to have the same amount for each quarter. So we can come in here and choose those different options that we have at the account level and say, this is actually a $5,000 quarterly lodging expense that we want to be able to capture. So you now can see as I'm entering and changing the different areas in the form down below, our numbers reflect that in the preview of the P&L for budget. So we can go ahead and save that information, and that will now automatically consolidate to the top level so you can see a total company level with any of those changes we just saved automatically consolidated. Now let's say we were planning out our salary and wages for our different departments. In our salary and wages area, we have pre-built capabilities to load in employee level detail, add to be hireds, add per employee expenses, and so forth to be able to capture not only salary and wages, but also things like benefits, employment taxes, bonuses, and so forth. So we now can see for our marketing department, we have one employee, we have their salary associated to that employee, any benefits as well, benefits, taxes, bonuses, and so forth, and any of those assumptions that we're applying. So it's nice because we're able to use global assumptions to be able to apply to our employees. So if we look at that employee level detail, you can see Patricia Wagner here. She's our marketing manager. We have an employee ID, a base salary, and based upon those employee assumptions that we saw earlier, we now can see her benefits being calculated out for that total salary and wages for this particular employee. Of course, you can have multiple employees. For example, in our G&A area, we have Mo Vienna, for example, Hank Riley, as well as a to be hired. So we have that ability to layer on our to be hireds with a hire date expected, as well as those salary and wages expenses calculated out for us. And you also have the ability to look at that at a total level as well. So instead of just looking department by department, we have a full view of all of our employees, contractors, to be hireds within the organization right here on one screen with all of their information around roles, start date, base salary, bonus, et cetera, et cetera. So you have that capabilities to see all your employees in one single view. Now, one more item around our budget line items that's really fantastic is, let's say that we want to be able to allocate all our G&A expenses to our different departments, our marketing, our operations, and our sales departments with a single click of a button. So instead of having to create, calculation scripts to be able to allocate these dollars to different areas of the budget, because we have a multi-dimensional budget here in Sage Intacct Planning, you can see at our G&A level, so all those expenses that roll up to your G&A department, what we want to do is allocate them to our different departments. So instead of tagging them with G&A here, what I can do is add our couple departments, change that to marketing, change that to operations, and change that to sales. And I have the option to allocate this dollar amount, this expense, by a percentage. So we can say marketing gets 50%, operations gets 25%, and sales gets 25%. So now when I'm looking at my reporting factor, I'll see that split hitting our different departments within the financial statements. So it's as easy as that, as to allocate a group of expenses to a different area of the budget. But also I can even allocate that by headcount. So by clicking this checkbox, I have an option to say I want to allocate this G&A expense to those different departments by headcount. And I can choose what headcount type I want to use for that count. So I can include contractors or not. So we'll go ahead and include contractors. So when I select all and save, that dollar amount for G&A expenses now will be allocated to these departments based upon the number of headcount I have in those departments. So very easy to be able to allocate either employee expenses or any expenses or revenues, any part of a budget you're able to allocate to different dimensions. So very powerful from that standpoint. Now we've reviewed quite a few ways of getting information into our budget. And one last area I wanted to cover from entering data is the ability to use an Excel budget template that we have created for you to be able to download at any level within your budget structure, change that set of data, and re-upload it into the tool using our import feature. Really easy to do. So in this example, our marketing department, we want to be able to export that information, all those accounts that roll up to our central location for our marketing group in the budget template, and we'll go ahead and do that. It's going to export an Excel file for us, and when I open that, it's going to give us all that information that's within the marketing department. So now I can see our marketing for our central location. Here's the different accounts that we have access to, be able to make changes to, and so forth. All of the set of data that we have that we saw within the tool. So now at a mass change, what we can do is say, our consulting dollars, for example, we're actually beefing those up a bit. Instead of $7,400 a quarter, we're going to go ahead and say this is a $15,000 expense for the entire year. So by making your typical changes that you would to the set of data within Excel, within this budget template, we can go ahead and save that. I'll go ahead and close that. And now you can distribute that. Team members can make changes. When you receive that back, you can use our Excel import function to be able to go to that file that we just saved. It's going to recognize that it's a budget template and walk you through a 4-step process to import this set of information. Now we've identified the rows and columns. We want to be able to tell the system what actuals account it is, we want to go ahead and select those columns of data that we want to be able to import. So it automatically identifies the month and year. And now we want to go ahead and select next. And what it's going to show us is it's going to identify these highlighted budget lines are already existing in your budget. So you can choose whether to go ahead and import those or not. Right now we'll go ahead and just update. Actually, we'll go ahead and update all of them, including that consulting lines that we changed to $15,000 each year. Select next. We can choose whether to overwrite it, add a new line, or don't import. We can go ahead and just overwrite all of them and then click next. Make any adjustment changes from a percentage standpoint. So if we wanted to make one more adjustment, let's say to postage and delivery, we'll increase that by 50%. Go ahead and import that. And now the process is complete. So with our confetti screen, we can see that our marketing has now increased quite a bit. And we can see that, as we know, our consulting dollars that we made changes to now reflects $15,000 each month. And also our postage and delivery has increased by 50%. So it's that easy to be able to export a budget template, make changes, re-import, and now you have a fully consolidated set of budget information by either entering data within these various forms or using our budget template within Excel. Now, last but not least, just to show you the integration back to Sage Intacct, let's say our budget is complete. We want to be able to push our data from Sage Intacct Planning back into Sage Intacct for use in our reports and our dashboards that we already have created in the system. We can go ahead and sign back in to Sage Intacct. Instead of importing actuals, we want to export my budget to Sage Intacct. We can choose whether we want to be able to add to an existing budget we already have in Sage Intacct or create a brand new budget. Let's go ahead and create a brand new budget. And we can go ahead and name that. So we'll go ahead and say this is March forecast, and we'll go ahead and use that as a description too. We can add to the budget at top level or entity. If we wanted to set it as a budget, our default budget, it's going to go ahead and ask if we want to enter that by monthly, quarterly, yearly. We'll go ahead and choose monthly. We can choose which financial reports will just include the P&L set of data, what dimensions we want to load this into Sage Intacct by, map any budget lines where we have missing accounts. So we want to make sure your export is accurate. So we can come in here and choose and modify any of the mappings that may not be already set up. So we can go ahead and do that, as well as mapping any dimensions that we may not have mapped, and then go ahead and click next. So it's going to go ahead and export our budget, and we will have access to that budget within Sage Intacct. So I'll pause there and I'll go right over to Sage Intacct so you can see what that looks like. Now I've logged into Sage Intacct and navigated to one of our dashboards, the analysis and planning, our rolling forecast. You can see our standard and our premium products. And if I look over here on the right, we have a couple months worth of actuals, and then we have our budget. So our budget numbers are being generated from our Sage Intacct planning set of data. So this is not the exact budget I just exported, but to show you, this is how it would interact with the Sage Intacct dashboards and reports. So once you export that information, just like what we did, we now have created that connection from Sage Intacct into Sage Intacct Planning. So now we can click into those numbers that we see in our Sage Intacct reports. It will open a brand new tab within our browser and open the view only mode to that particular dollar amount. So for example, we just click on standard products. It brought me all the way through to that budget within Sage Intacct Planning. And now I can see this is the exact information that we had that I can now access, whether the model or however that information was built within the tool. So it's really powerful from that standpoint where we can see the information from our budgets or forecasts in Sage Intacct, be able to click through to that number with a single click and now have access and details to all this information within Sage Intacct Planning. We hope you enjoyed this short demonstration on the connected and symbiotic nature with Sage Intacct and how you can leverage dimensions, structure, and data to quickly build a budget within minutes, as well as the bidirectional integration of drilling through from Sage Intacct dashboards and reports to Sage Intacct planning to see all the details behind it, as well as creating those budget versus actuals reports within Sage Intacct planning.